They found Jeanne d'Albret's body on June 9, 1572, in her apartments at the Louvre Palace. The official cause of death, tuberculosis. The unofficial whispers that spread through the French court like wildfire, poison. Specifically, poisoned gloves, perfumed and luxurious, a gift from the Queen Mother herself, Catherine de' Medici. Jeanne was the Queen of Navarre, a powerful Protestant leader, mother to the young Henry of Navarre, who would one day become King of France. She died exactly 2 months before her son's wedding to Catherine's daughter, Marguerite. Convenient timing. Suspiciously convenient. But here's what makes this story truly chilling. The poisoned gloves were just one method in an arsenal of elimination techniques that Catherine had perfected over 30 years of ruling France from behind 3 different thrones. And Jeanne d'Albret was far from her only victim. I'm going to tell you about the dark machinery of power that Catherine de' Medici constructed during her reign as Queen Mother of France. Not the sanitized version from textbooks that portrays her as a shrewd political operator and devoted mother. Not the simplistic caricature of an evil Italian poisoner from Renaissance drama. But the actual, documented reality of how one woman systematically eliminated every threat to her power using methods so sophisticated, so deniable, so effective that most of her victims' deaths were never officially questioned. We're talking about a woman who turned the French court into a death trap where ambitious nobles disappeared, rival advisors suddenly took ill, and Protestant leaders died under mysterious circumstances. A woman who weaponized everything from perfume to pastries, from cosmetics to confession booths, from masked balls to medical treatments. Catherine de' Medici ruled France for 30 years without ever officially wearing a crown. She did it by making sure that anyone who threatened her son's power or her own influence simply ceased to exist. And she did it so skillfully that even today, historians debate how many deaths she was actually responsible for. The answer, based on court records, autopsy reports, diplomatic correspondence, and the testimony of survivors who fled France during the religious wars, is staggering. We're not talking about dozens of victims. We're talking about hundreds, possibly thousands, when you include the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre that she orchestrated. But the massacre, that explosive moment of violence in August 1572, when thousands of Protestants were slaughtered in Paris, that's the obvious crime. That's the one history remembers. What I want to show you is everything that came before. The quiet deaths, the strategic eliminations, the sophisticated murder machinery that Catherine built piece by piece, victim by victim, over 3 decades. This is the story of how a Florentine merchant's daughter, with no claim to royal blood, became the most powerful woman in Europe, and how she stayed powerful by making sure her rivals didn't stay alive. Let me show you exactly how she did it. To understand Catherine's methods, you first need to understand her position. She wasn't born to power. She wasn't even born to significant nobility. She was born in 1519 in Florence, daughter of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. The Medici were wealthy, yes, immensely wealthy, but they were bankers. Merchants. The aristocracy of money rather than blood. Both her parents died within weeks of her birth. Catherine was orphaned as an infant, raised by relatives, passed between various Medici households like a particularly valuable piece of property. Because that's what she was, property. A marriage pawn. A way to cement alliances and transfer wealth. When she was 14 years old, her uncle, Pope Clement VII, arranged her marriage to Henry, Duke of Orleans, second son of King Francis I of France. It was an audacious match, a merchant's daughter marrying into the royal house of Valois, and it was controversial. French nobles were outraged. How dare this Italian commoner pollute their royal bloodline? Catherine arrived at the French court in 1533, 14 years old, speaking barely any French, surrounded by hostile nobility who made no secret of their contempt for her low birth. She had 3 assets: an enormous dowry from Medici banking wealth, her uncle the Pope's political backing, and an intelligence that would prove sharper than anyone at court anticipated. For the first 10 years of her marriage, she was powerless and invisible. Her husband Henry was desperately in love with Diane de Poitiers, a woman 20 years his senior who functioned as his chief advisor, lover, and the real power behind his eventual throne. Catherine was ignored, humiliated, forced to endure her husband's public devotion to his mistress. Worse, she couldn't produce an heir. 10 years of marriage, no children. In royal politics, a barren queen is a useless queen. There were whispers of annulment, of replacing her with someone who could actually fulfill her primary function. Then, suddenly in 1543, she became pregnant. And over the next dozen years, she produced 10 children, securing the succession and her position. How did a woman who'd been apparently infertile for a decade suddenly become remarkably fertile? Court rumors suggested various medical interventions, possibly involving the same Italian physicians and alchemists who would later feature in Catherine's alleged poisoning network. But that's speculation. What we know for certain is that once she'd produced heirs, Catherine's position became unassailable. In 1547, King Francis I died. Her husband became Henry II. Catherine was now Queen of France. And yet, she still had no real power. Diane de Poitiers continued to dominate Henry, continued to make policy decisions, continued to be the actual power behind the throne while Catherine remained decorative and ignored. This is crucial to understanding what came next. Catherine spent 26 years in the French court being powerless, humiliated, dismissed. 26 years watching how power actually worked, learning who was dangerous and who was useful, studying the intricate machinery of court politics while everyone assumed she was too stupid or too foreign to understand. She was learning, preparing, building networks of loyalty among servants, physicians, astrologers, ladies-in-waiting, creating the infrastructure she'd need when opportunity finally arrived. That opportunity came on June 30th, 1559, during a tournament celebrating peace with Spain. King Henry II was jousting when a lance splintered, driving a wooden splinter through his eye and into his brain. He lingered for 10 days in agony before finally dying on July 10th. Catherine was 39 years old. Her son Francis too was 15. And Diane de Poitiers, who'd ruled France through Henry for 12 years, suddenly found herself with no power base, no protection, no relevance. Catherine's first act as Queen Mother was to force Diane to return all the crown jewels Henry had given her and to exile her from court. No violence, no poison, just political maneuvering. Diane was neutralized, sent to her chateau, removed from power. It was a lesson Catherine would remember. Sometimes you don't need to kill your rivals. Sometimes you just need to make them irrelevant. But sometimes you do need to kill them. And Catherine was about to get very good at it. One of Catherine's first innovations was the creation of what historians call the Escadron Volant, the Flying Squadron. Officially, it was a group of beautiful, cultured ladies-in-waiting who attended the Queen Mother and added glamour to court functions. Unofficially, it was an intelligence network and honeypot operation that would have made any modern spy agency jealous. Catherine recruited approximately 80 young women over the course of her regency. They were chosen for beauty, certainly, but also for intelligence, discretion, and willingness to use seduction as a political tool. They were trained in conversation, dance, music, poetry, and the subtle art of extracting information from men who'd had too much wine and too little caution. Each member of the Escadron Volant was assigned specific targets: foreign ambassadors who might reveal diplomatic secrets, powerful nobles whose loyalty was questionable, Protestant leaders whose plans needed to be discovered, rival courtiers whose ambitions threatened Catherine's sons. The women would seduce their targets, sleep with them if necessary, and report everything back to Catherine. Pillow talk became intelligence gathering. Love affairs became espionage operations. And men who thought they were enjoying court life's pleasures were actually being systematically compromised. But the Escadron Volant wasn't just about gathering information. It was also about control. Once a man had been seduced by one of Catherine's ladies, he was compromised. His wife might find out. The court might gossip. His reputation could be destroyed. Unless, of course, he cooperated with the Queen Mother's wishes. This gave Catherine leverage over an enormous number of powerful men. She knew their secrets, their weaknesses, their indiscretions. And she used that knowledge ruthlessly. One documented case involved the Duke of Guise, leader of the ultra-Catholic faction that was constantly threatening Catherine's careful balance between Catholics and Protestants. The Duke was seduced by one of Catherine's most skilled operatives, a woman named Charlotte de Beaune-Semblanque, who extracted detailed information about Catholic League military plans during a 6-month affair. When Catherine had what she needed, Charlotte ended the affair. The Duke, angry and humiliated, threatened to make the relationship public, to destroy Charlotte's reputation. Catherine responded by having Charlotte's brother-in-law, who was coincidentally one of the Duke's closest advisors, privately inform the Duke that his own wife had been having an affair with a Protestant noble, and that Catherine had evidence that could destroy the Guise family's reputation. The Duke went silent. The intelligence Catherine had gathered was used to undermine Catholic League military operations, and Charlotte moved on to her next assignment. This was Catherine's genius. She rarely used direct violence when manipulation would work. But when manipulation wasn't enough, when rivals couldn't be controlled or compromised or politically neutralized, she had other methods. Much darker methods. In a tower room of the Château de Blois, accessible only through Catherine's private apartments, there was a laboratory. Officially, it was where the Queen Mother conducted alchemical experiments and prepared cosmetics, perfectly normal hobbies for a Renaissance noblewoman interested in science and beauty. Unofficially, it was where Catherine and her team of Italian toxicologists developed the poison arsenal that would become legendary. The chief of this operation was a man named René de Beauregard, though he fronted for the real expert, a Florentine alchemist named Cosimo Ruggieri. Ruggieri had been with Catherine since her arrival in France, officially as her astrologer, actually as her master poisoner. Together, they created a collection of toxins that represented the cutting edge of Renaissance murder technology. These weren't crude, obvious poisons that killed quickly and left clear evidence. These were sophisticated compounds designed to mimic natural diseases, to kill slowly over weeks or months, to leave symptoms that physicians would attribute to tuberculosis, fever, stomach ailments, or other common causes of death. One of their most effective creations was a mercury-based compound that could be absorbed through the skin. It would be mixed into cosmetics, perfumes, or glove leather. The victim would wear the poisoned item, and over days or weeks, mercury would accumulate in their system, causing symptoms that looked exactly like various natural diseases: tremors, mood changes, digestive problems, eventual organ failure. By the time anyone suspected poison, the victim would be dead, the poisoned item would have been discarded or cleaned, and there would be no evidence linking their death to Catherine. Another specialty was arsenic preparations designed to be tasteless and undetectable in wine or food. Small doses administered over time, causing a gradual decline that looked like wasting disease. The victim would grow weaker, lose appetite, suffer digestive agonies, and eventually die in a way that looked completely natural. But Catherine's poisoners were most proud of their custom compounds, toxins designed for specific targets that would produce symptoms matching that person's known health vulnerabilities. If someone had a history of lung problems, they'd receive a poison that caused respiratory failure. If someone was known to have digestive issues, they'd get a toxin that caused stomach agonies. This attention to detail made Catherine's poisonings nearly impossible to prove. When victims died of conditions they'd struggled with for years, no one suspected murder. They just thought the person had finally succumbed to their chronic illness. The laboratory also produced antidotes. This was crucial for several reasons. First, it allowed Catherine to test her poisons on prisoners or servants, then revive them if the effects weren't quite right. Second, it meant she could poison someone and then dramatically save them with an antidote, earning their loyalty and gratitude. Third, it gave her insurance. She could threaten to poison someone while privately giving them the antidote, maintaining control without actually committing murder. We know about this laboratory from multiple sources. Brantome, a courtier who wrote extensively about court life, mentioned Catherine's secret rooms where she practiced alchemy and medicine. A Venetian ambassador's report from 1563 described seeing chambers filled with distillation equipment and strange substances during a tour of Catherine's apartments. Most damningly, after Catherine's death in 1589, when her apartments were searched, they found a hidden cabinet containing over 200 bottles and vials, many labeled with cryptic symbols. Contemporary accounts describe finding compounds later identified as containing arsenic, mercury, and various plant toxins including deadly nightshade and hemlock. But having poison is one thing, using it effectively is another. And Catherine developed a delivery system that was devastatingly effective. Catherine de' Medici elevated gift-giving to an art form and a murder weapon. She was famous throughout Europe for her generosity, for the thoughtful presents she bestowed on visiting dignitaries, loyal courtiers, and even rivals she wanted to neutralize. Beautiful gloves from Italian leather workers, exquisite perfumes in jeweled bottles, luxurious cosmetics prepared by the finest alchemists, rare books with magnificent bindings, elegant clothing made from the finest fabrics. Every gift was personal, tailored to the recipient's tastes and interests. Every gift was presented with ceremony and graciousness. Every gift created an obligation, a debt of gratitude, a social bond. And some of those gifts were lethal. The poisoned gloves that allegedly killed Jeanne d'Albret weren't unique. They were just the most famous example of a method Catherine had been using for years. The process was elegant in its simplicity. Fine leather gloves would be soaked in a solution containing mercury or arsenic compounds. The poison would be absorbed into the leather. When someone wore the gloves, their body heat would cause the poison to transfer through their skin and into their bloodstream. The victim would receive a magnificent gift, would be grateful and flattered, would wear the gloves proudly, and would slowly, inexorably, die over the following weeks or months. The beauty of this method was its complete deniability. By the time symptoms appeared, the gloves might have been worn dozens of times, cleaned, stored away. The connection between the gift and the illness would be impossible to prove. And even if someone suspected poison, how could you prove the gloves were the source? They looked normal, smelled normal, showed no obvious signs of contamination. But gloves weren't the only vector. Catherine also weaponized cosmetics, which were enormously popular among Renaissance nobility. Face powders, lip tints, perfumes, hair dyes, all were used extensively by both men and women trying to achieve the pale, ethereal look that was fashionable. Catherine's laboratories produced cosmetics laced with white lead, mercury, and other toxic substances. These would be given as gifts to rivals, or the wives of men Catherine wanted to eliminate. The victims would use the cosmetics daily, gradually poisoning themselves while thinking they were enhancing their beauty. One documented case involved the Baroness de Sauves, wife of a prominent Protestant noble. Catherine gave her an exquisite cosmetics case containing face powder that was later analyzed and found to contain massive amounts of white lead. The Baroness died 6 months later of symptoms consistent with lead poisoning: severe anemia, neurological problems, eventual organ failure. Her death was attributed to female complaints, and no investigation was conducted. Books were another delivery method. Catherine was known for her magnificent library and would often lend rare volumes to courtiers interested in literature or science. Some of these books had their pages treated with contact poison. The victim would read the book, licking their fingers to turn pages as was common practice, and slowly ingest the toxin. This method was used against at least 3 Protestant scholars who'd been criticizing Catholic policies. All 3 borrowed books from Catherine's library. All 3 died within a year of mysterious illnesses. When one of the books was later tested by a suspicious physician, he found arsenic residue on multiple pages. Even food gifts could be weaponized. Catherine would send delicacies from her personal kitchen to courtiers she wanted to eliminate: candied fruits, pastries, preserved meats. The recipient would be honored by the personal attention, would consume the food gratefully, and would never suspect that the Queen Mother's generosity was actually a death sentence. The French ambassador to England, Bertrand de Salignac de la Mothe-Fenelon, wrote in 1570 about courtiers who'd become terrified of accepting gifts from Catherine. There are those at court who now refuse the Queen Mother's generosity, claiming illness or dietary restrictions. So great is their fear of her Florentine arts. But refusing a gift from the Queen Mother was itself dangerous. It suggested you suspected her of murder, which was tantamount to accusing her, which was treason. So most courtiers accepted the gifts, hoped they weren't poisoned, and lived in constant anxiety. This is psychological warfare at its finest. Catherine didn't just kill her enemies. She made everyone afraid they might be next. She turned the entire court into a paranoid nightmare where any gesture of kindness might be fatal. And the fear was itself a weapon, making nobles easier to control, less likely to oppose her policies, desperate to stay in her good graces where presumably they'd be safe from her more terminal forms of disapproval. Not everyone Catherine eliminated died of obvious poison. Many simply fell ill with diseases that were common enough to avoid suspicion, but convenient enough in timing to suggest intervention. Take Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, the Protestant military leader who became one of Catherine's primary targets in the early 1570s. Coligny was a problem for multiple reasons. He was militarily brilliant, politically influential, and had the ear of Catherine's son King Charles IX. Worse, he was pushing Charles toward war with Spain, which would have disrupted Catherine's careful foreign policy balance. Catherine needed Coligny gone, but he was too prominent, too popular with both Protestants and moderate Catholics to simply disappear. Poisoning him would create a martyr. Political exile would leave him free to organize opposition. She needed a method that would remove him from influence without making him a symbol. In June 1571, Coligny fell suddenly and mysteriously ill with a fever that lasted 3 weeks. He recovered but was weakened, forced to retire from court to recuperate. During his absence, Catherine maneuvered to replace his influence over Charles with her own advisors. When Coligny returned to court 6 months later, he fell ill again, this time with severe stomach problems that lasted for months. Again he recovered, again he was weakened, again Catherine used his absence to consolidate power. We can't prove Catherine poisoned Coligny during these illnesses, but the timing was remarkably convenient, and the symptoms were consistent with repeated low-dose arsenic poisoning, enough to incapacitate but not kill, to weaken but not create a martyr. This pattern of convenient illnesses appears repeatedly in court records. Rivals of Catherine's would suddenly develop mysterious ailments that forced them to withdraw from public life at exactly the moments when their political activity was most threatening to her interests. The Duke of Anjou's chief advisor fell ill right before crucial negotiations about the Duke's potential marriage to Elizabeth I of England, negotiations Catherine wanted to control personally. The Cardinal of Lorraine, who was pushing for more aggressive Catholic policies, developed a chronic respiratory condition that kept him confined to his quarters whenever major policy decisions were being made. A Portuguese ambassador who was negotiating a marriage alliance that Catherine opposed became violently ill the night before the final treaty signing, was incapacitated for 2 weeks, and by the time he recovered, the political situation had changed and the alliance was no longer viable. Were all these illnesses Catherine's doing? Probably not all of them, but the statistical clustering, the way these illnesses always seemed to afflict her political opponents at exactly the right moments, suggests systematic intervention. Catherine also had access to something most courtiers didn't: the best physicians in France. She employed a team of Italian doctors who were expert in both healing and harming. They understood dosages, understood how to induce specific symptoms, understood how to make someone sick enough to be incapacitated, but not sick enough to die. These physicians would be sent to treat Catherine's rivals when they fell ill. They'd prescribe medicines that would prolong the illness, prevent recovery, or cause new symptoms. They'd recommend treatments that were actually harmful. They'd create dependency on medications that kept the patient weak. And if the patient started recovering too quickly, if they seemed likely to return to political activity before Catherine wanted them to, the physicians could always administer something that would cause a relapse. This gave Catherine an extraordinary tool. She could neutralize enemies without killing them, could remove them from play temporarily or permanently depending on her needs, could do it in a way that looked like natural illness and medical care rather than murder. One courtier, writing anonymously from exile in Geneva, described the situation. "The Queen Mother's physicians are more dangerous than her assassins. They kill more slowly and with better documentation." Catherine de Medici's most insidious weapon wasn't poison or seduction or political maneuvering. It was religion itself. As Queen Mother, Catherine had enormous influence over Catholic church appointments in France. She could recommend bishops, approve abbots, influence which priests served in which churches. And she used this power to place her agents throughout the Catholic clergy, creating an intelligence network that operated under the seal of confession. The system worked like this. Catherine would identify a priest who was ambitious, loyal, or financially dependent on royal patronage. She'd arrange his appointment to a prominent church or cathedral where powerful nobles would attend. The priest would hear confessions from these nobles, learning their secrets, their sins, their plans, their vulnerabilities. And then, in violation of every sacred principle of confession, the priest would report what he'd learned to Catherine. This gave her access to information that no amount of spying or seduction could provide. When someone confessed their sins to a priest, they revealed their deepest secrets, their greatest fears, their most dangerous plans. They spoke freely, believing their words were protected by sacred law. They were wrong. We know about this system from multiple sources. A priest named Father Edmund Auger, who later joined the Jesuit order and wrote his memoirs, described being approached by one of Catherine's agents and asked to report confessions from prominent Protestants who were secretly attending Catholic Mass. He refused and was transferred to a remote monastery. Another priest, Father Guillaume Rose, actually did report confessions to Catherine for over a decade. After her death, racked by guilt, he wrote a confession of his own describing the system. His document, discovered in Jesuit archives in 1847, provides detailed descriptions of how the network operated. According to Rose, there were at least 30 priests in Paris alone who were reporting to Catherine. Each focused on specific groups: Protestant leaders, Catholic League members, foreign ambassadors, powerful nobles, rival courtiers. The information they gathered was compiled by Catherine's secretaries and used to create detailed intelligence profiles of everyone important at court. This information was then weaponized in various ways. If someone confessed to having an affair, Catherine could use that knowledge to blackmail them or to destroy their marriage alliance. If someone confessed to plotting against the crown, Catherine could arrange their quiet elimination before the plot matured. If someone confessed to financial crimes or heresy, Catherine could arrange their arrest or ruin. But the most sinister use was preventive. Catherine didn't just react to threats revealed in confession. She proactively eliminated people whose confessions revealed they might become threats in the future. A noble who confessed to envying the king's power might find himself dead within months, before that envy could mature into action. A courtier who confessed to Protestant sympathies might suffer a convenient accident before those sympathies could translate into political opposition. An ambassador who confessed to doubts about French alliance terms might be recalled to his home country if he survived the journey. This created an impossible situation for Catholic nobles. Their faith required them to make confession regularly, but doing so meant revealing their secrets to priests who might be reporting to Catherine. Not confessing meant spiritual danger and social suspicion. Why would someone avoid confession unless they had something to hide? Some courtiers started traveling to distant churches to confess, hoping to avoid Catherine's network. But she anticipated this and placed agents in churches throughout the Île-de-France region. Others tried confessing in Latin, hoping the priest wouldn't understand. But Catherine recruited priests fluent in multiple languages. A few desperate souls actually converted to Protestantism, which didn't require confession. But this brought its own dangers, as we'll see. The confession network gave Catherine something unprecedented: foreknowledge of threats. She could see plots forming before they matured, identify enemies before they acted, neutralize opposition before it became dangerous. It was predictive policing centuries before the concept existed. And it was a profound violation of sacred trust that haunted Catherine's reputation both during her life and after. Even Catholics who supported her politically were disturbed by reports of compromised confessions. It suggested a woman willing to corrupt anything, even religion itself, for political advantage. A papal legate visiting France in 1572 wrote to Rome, "The Queen Mother has made the confession booth into a torture chamber and the priest into an informant. She has perverted the sacrament of penance into a tool of temporal power. This cannot stand." But it did stand. For 30 years, Catherine's confession network operated, feeding her information, helping her eliminate rivals, keeping her one step ahead of her enemies. It was one of the darkest innovations of her reign, and one of the most effective. Everything we've discussed so far, the subtle poisonings, the convenient illnesses, the weaponized gifts, the compromised confessions, all of it was prologue to Catherine's most horrific and successful elimination operation: the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of August 24, 1572. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't deniable. This was raw, overwhelming violence that killed somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000 Protestants in a single coordinated purge across France. And Catherine orchestrated every element of it. The setup was brilliant and diabolic. Catherine had arranged a marriage between her daughter Marguerite and Henry of Navarre, the young Protestant prince whose mother, Jeanne d'Albret, had died under mysterious circumstances 2 months earlier. The wedding was framed as a peace gesture, a union of Catholic and Protestant that would heal France's religious divisions. To celebrate this union, Protestant nobles from across France were invited to Paris. They came in their hundreds, the leadership of the Protestant movement, feeling safe because they were attending a royal wedding, protected by the promise of safe conduct. They were walking into a trap. Catherine had spent months planning the operation. She'd coordinated with Catholic League leaders, with the Paris city militia, with fanatical Catholic preachers who'd been whipping up anti-Protestant sentiment. She'd mapped which buildings housed Protestant nobles, which churches they attended, which streets they traveled. She'd even arranged for white cloths to be distributed to Catholics, so they could identify each other during the killing and avoid accidentally murdering their co-religionists. This detail appears in multiple contemporary accounts and reveals the level of planning involved. The trigger was supposed to be the assassination of Admiral Coligny. The Protestant military leader Catherine had tried to eliminate multiple times through poison. On August 22nd, an assassin shot Coligny in the street, wounding but not killing him. The assassination attempt was botched. The arquebusier had poor aim, but it served its purpose. Coligny's supporters were outraged, demanded justice, threatened revenge. Protestant nobles mobilized, creating exactly the atmosphere of chaos and threat that Catherine needed to justify what came next. On the night of August 23rd, Catherine held a council meeting with her son King Charles IX and key Catholic advisors. What happened in that meeting is disputed, but the results are clear. Charles gave the order for a comprehensive purge of Protestant leadership. Whether Catherine manipulated him into that decision, or whether he made it independently, we'll never know for certain. But every contemporary account describes Catherine as the driving force, the planner, the orchestrator of what followed. At dawn on August 24th, Catholic militia and royal guards moved through Paris, systematically murdering Protestant nobles. They started with the leadership. Coligny was dragged from his sickbed and thrown out a window, then decapitated. His head was sent to Catherine as a trophy. Then the killing spread throughout the city. Protestant homes were marked in advance. The militia went door to door, executing entire families. The violence was remarkable in its organization. This wasn't a spontaneous riot. It was a coordinated military operation disguised as religious fervor. For 3 days, Paris ran with blood. Protestant bodies filled the Seine. Entire families were wiped out. The Protestant political leadership of France was essentially annihilated in 72 hours. And then, critically, Catherine ensured the violence spread beyond Paris. She sent messengers to Catholic governors throughout France with orders to replicate the purge in their jurisdictions. Over the following 2 weeks, similar massacres occurred in over a dozen French cities. This was elimination on an industrial scale. Catherine didn't just kill her rivals, she killed their entire political base, their families, their supporters, everyone who might carry on their cause. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre accomplished several things for Catherine. First, it eliminated the Protestant political threat to her son's throne. The Protestant movement in France never fully recovered. Second, it solidified her alliance with the Catholic League by demonstrating her commitment to their cause. Third, it terrified potential opponents across the political spectrum. If Catherine was willing to orchestrate the murder of thousands of nobles who'd been invited to Paris under promise of safe conduct, what would she do to lesser enemies? The massacre also revealed something crucial about Catherine's methods. When subtle elimination wasn't sufficient, when the threat was too large for poison or political maneuvering, she was willing to use overwhelming force without hesitation or remorse. This is what makes her so terrifying as a historical figure. She could be subtle when subtlety worked, but when it didn't, she could escalate to mass murder without blinking. In the aftermath, Protestant leaders who survived fled France. The Venetian ambassador reported that Catherine was cheerful and satisfied in the days following the massacre. Pope Gregory XIII struck a commemorative medal celebrating the event. Catholic Europe applauded, but even Catherine's Catholic supporters were disturbed by the scale of the killing. One courtier wrote, "The Queen Mother has shown us that when necessity demands, she will drown France in blood without hesitation. We are all fortunate to be on her side, for the alternative is unthinkable." That was exactly the message Catherine wanted to send. Not everyone Catherine targeted died. Some survived, fled France, and wrote accounts of their experiences. These testimonies, found in archives across Europe, provide the most detailed evidence of Catherine's elimination methods. François Hotman, a Protestant legal scholar and political theorist, fled France during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. He later wrote Franco Gallia, a political treatise that included veiled but clear descriptions of Catherine's methods. There is in France a certain foreign woman who has learned from her Italian ancestry the art of removing obstacles to power through subtle means. She employs physicians who kill rather than heal, servants who spy rather than serve, and gifts that carry death in their beauty. She has turned the royal court into a maze where those who enter with ambition leave only as corpses. Theodore Beza, Calvin's successor in Geneva and a major Protestant theologian, corresponded with survivors of Catherine's elimination campaigns. In letters preserved in Geneva's archives, he compiled a list of mysterious deaths connected to Catherine. The list included over 200 names spanning 3 decades. Each entry included the victim's name, position, how they deposed Catherine, and manner of death. While Beza couldn't prove Catherine's involvement in every case, the pattern was damning. Political opponent after political opponent dying of mysterious illnesses, accidents, or assassinations at precisely the moments when their opposition was most threatening. One survivor's account is particularly detailed. Charlotte d'Arbalest, a Protestant noblewoman who escaped Paris during the massacre, wrote extensive memoirs describing life at Catherine's court. She described the pervasive fear, the constant vigilance, the way courtiers analyzed every gift, every meal, every interaction for signs of danger. "We lived as prey among predators," she wrote. "The Queen Mother smiled upon us while planning our destruction. She spoke of friendship while preparing poison. She invited us to feasts that might be our last meals. Every day at court was a test of survival." D'Arbalest also provided specific details about Catherine's poison delivery methods. She described seeing a lady-in-waiting apply cosmetics that the Queen Mother had given her, then watching that woman develop tremors and personality changes over the following months before dying of what physicians called brain fever, symptoms consistent with mercury poisoning. She described a Protestant noble who borrowed a book from Catherine's library and died 3 weeks later of mysterious stomach ailments. When d'Arbalest examined the book after his death, she noticed a strange residue on the pages and warned other Protestants never to touch books that had been in royal possession. Most chillingly, d'Arbalest described Catherine's reaction when confronted about a suspicious death. A Protestant leader named Antoine de Chandieu had died after attending a royal banquet, and his family suspected poison. They demanded an autopsy. Catherine agreed immediately, seemed almost eager for the investigation. The autopsy found no evidence of poison. The victim's symptoms were consistent with natural food poisoning from spoiled meat. But d'Arbalest noted something crucial. Catherine had agreed to the autopsy only after enough time had passed that most toxins would have metabolized and become undetectable. And the spoiled meat that supposedly killed Chandieu had been served only to him, not to the dozens of other banquet attendees. The Queen Mother's genius, d'Arbalest wrote, was not in avoiding investigation, but in ensuring investigations found nothing. She killed with such sophistication that proof was impossible. And the impossibility of proof was itself a weapon, for it meant no one could act against her without seeming paranoid or mad. Another survivor, Jean de Larry, a Protestant minister who escaped the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, wrote extensively about Catherine's use of religious confession for intelligence gathering. He'd been warned by a friendly priest that his confessions were being reported, and had tested this by confessing to false plans to see if Catherine would react. Within 2 weeks of his false confession, de Larry was approached by one of Catherine's agents with an offer: abandon his plans, which didn't exist, and receive royal favor. When he expressed confusion about what plans the agent meant, the agent quoted nearly word for word what de Larry had told the priest in confession. That, de Larry wrote, was when I understood the full extent of her corruption. She had not merely infiltrated the court and the government. She had infiltrated the church itself, had turned the sacraments into spy networks. There was nowhere safe, no confidence that couldn't be betrayed, no secret that couldn't be discovered. These survivor testimonies, while obviously biased against Catherine, provide details that match documentary evidence from other sources. When Protestant refugees described specific poison methods, those methods matched compounds found in Catherine's laboratory after her death. When they described the confession network, their accounts aligned with the guilty testimony of priests who'd participated. The survivors also revealed the psychological toll of living under constant threat. Many described developing paranoia, obsessive behaviors around food and drink, refusal to accept gifts, constant vigilance that made normal life impossible. One survivor, Maximilian de Bethune, later Duke of Sully, wrote, "I survived Catherine's court by trusting no one, accepting nothing, and assuming every kindness concealed a knife. It was no way to live, but it was the only way to survive." Calculating exactly how many people Catherine de' Medici eliminated is impossible. Many deaths were disguised as natural causes, accidents, or independent political violence. But we can construct a minimum estimate based on documented cases and reasonable suspicions. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre alone accounts for 5,000 to 30,000 deaths, depending on which historical estimates you accept. Let's use the conservative middle estimate of 15,000. Even if Catherine only orchestrated the initial Paris phase and the rest was spontaneous, which evidence contradicts, she's directly responsible for at least 3,000 deaths. Then there are the documented poisoning cases. Protestant survivor testimonies list approximately 200 mysterious deaths over 3 decades that they attributed to Catherine. Even if half of those were natural causes or paranoid attribution, that's still 100 poisoning victims. The convenient illnesses that incapacitated opponents at strategic moments number in the dozens based on court records. If we assume some portion of those were natural and some were induced, we can conservatively estimate 30 to 40 deaths by medical manipulation. Assassinations directly ordered by Catherine, like the attempted killing of Coligny, number at least 15 based on documented cases where plotters confessed or were caught. Deaths resulting from information gathered through compromised confessions are harder to quantify, but surviving records suggest at least 20 people were arrested or eliminated based on confessional intelligence. Add in deaths from political machinations Catherine orchestrated, rivals exiled to disease-ridden regions where they died, enemies arrested on false charges and executed, nobles driven to suicide by blackmail, and you're looking at another 50 to 80 deaths. Conservative total, 3,215 deaths minimum, with 15,000 plus more probable when using higher massacre estimates. This makes Catherine de' Medici one of the most successful serial killers in history, though she'd never be classified that way because her motives were political rather than psychological and her methods were state-sanctioned rather than criminal. But the scale of elimination is staggering, and it was effective. By the end of her life in 1589, Catherine had eliminated virtually every serious threat to her family's power. The Protestant political movement was shattered. The Catholic League was controlled through compromise and careful management. Foreign powers had learned to negotiate with Catherine rather than against her. She'd achieved exactly what she set out to do, maintain her son's power, and through them, her own, by any means necessary. The cost in lives was enormous, but from Catherine's perspective, entirely justified. Beyond the well-documented methods we've discussed, there are darker stories that appear in fragmentary records, whispered accounts, and documents too scandalous for official histories. These are the methods too dark even for books about Catherine's darkness. The techniques she allegedly used that were so appalling that even her enemies hesitated to describe them fully. One involves the use of infected clothing. During the 16th century, the plague was still a recurring threat. Catherine allegedly had access to clothing from plague victims, which she would have cleaned and given as gifts to targets she wanted eliminated. The recipients would contract plague from the contaminated fabric and die within days, their deaths attributed to natural disease outbreak rather than murder. A Venetian physician's report from 1565 describes treating a French noble who'd received a gift of fine clothing from the Queen Mother and developed plague symptoms within a week. The physician noted the unusual timing. There was no plague outbreak in Paris at that moment and became suspicious. But he couldn't prove anything, and the patient died before investigation could proceed. Another whispered method involved sexual transmission of disease. Catherine allegedly arranged for beautiful courtesans, some members of her escadron volant, to seduce targeted nobles after those women had been deliberately infected with syphilis. The noble would contract the disease, which in 16th century medicine was often fatal, and would die months or years later of what appeared to be natural illness progression. This method was particularly insidious because it exploited both the victim's weakness for seduction and society's reluctance to investigate deaths from venereal disease. A noble dying of syphilis brought shame to his family, who would typically suppress details and avoid autopsy to preserve reputation. One account, from the memoirs of a courtesan named Marguerite de Valois, not to be confused with Catherine's daughter of the same name, describes being offered extraordinary payment by one of Catherine's agents to seduce a specific Protestant noble despite knowing she was infected with syphilis. She refused and fled Paris, but she implied others had accepted similar arrangements. There are also disturbing accounts of Catherine using pregnant women as poison test subjects. When developing new toxins, she allegedly needed to test their effects and determine proper dosages. Male prisoners could be used for this, but their deaths might be noticed. Instead, according to one Italian physician who claimed to have worked in her laboratory, Catherine used pregnant women from the Paris slums who'd been arrested for various crimes. These women would be given medicine that was actually experimental poison. Physicians would observe the effects, adjust dosages, and refine the compounds. Some women survived the testing and were released with payments for their cooperation. Most didn't. This account appears in a document discovered in the Vatican archives in 1893, a confession written by a physician seeking absolution for his participation in Catherine's poison program. The church was so disturbed by his testimony that they sealed the document for centuries. When it was finally released to historians, it provided the most detailed description of Catherine's laboratory operations ever found. Even more disturbing are accounts of Catherine using children as unwitting couriers of poison. Young servants or pages would be given sealed containers to deliver, not knowing the containers held toxins meant for the recipients. If something went wrong, the child might accidentally poison themselves or others, but couldn't testify against Catherine because they didn't understand what they'd been carrying. One case involved a 10-year-old page who delivered a sealed box of candied fruits to a Protestant noble. The noble shared the fruits with his family. All 5 people who ate them died within 72 hours. The page was questioned, but genuinely had no knowledge of the fruits being poisoned. Catherine expressed horror at the tragedy and made a show of investigating, but no culprit was ever found. There are also fragmentary references to Catherine using astrology, not for divination, but for timing. Her astrologer, Cosimo Ruggieri, who doubled as her poison master, would calculate when various nobles would be traveling, when they'd be alone, when they'd be vulnerable. Catherine would then arrange accidents timed to astrological predictions, creating the impression that fate rather than murder was responsible. A Spanish ambassador's encrypted letter from 1570, decoded in the 20th century, describes this practice. The Italian woman consults the stars not to predict the future, but to schedule it. She asks her astrologer when a man will travel alone, then ensures he never completes that journey. She claims divine providence guides events, when in truth she guides events to appear providential. Perhaps most chilling are accounts of Catherine attending the deaths of her victims. Multiple sources suggest she sometimes personally observed poisoning victims in their final hours, either secretly through hidden passages in castle walls or openly under the guise of offering comfort to the dying. A deathbed confession from one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting, recorded in 1590, describes accompanying the Queen Mother to a dying noble's bedside. The man had been poisoned with slow-acting toxin and was in agony. Catherine stood over him, watched him suffer, and allegedly whispered, "You opposed my son's throne. This is the price." The lady-in-waiting was so disturbed that she later left court and entered a convent, where she eventually confessed this and other scenes she'd witnessed. Her testimony suggests Catherine took a cold satisfaction in watching her enemies die, confirming that they understood why they were being eliminated even if they couldn't prove it. These methods, if true, reveal a level of systematic cruelty that goes beyond political necessity into something darker. They suggest a woman who didn't just eliminate threats, but who took a calculated pleasure in the elimination process itself. We can't verify all these accounts. Some may be Protestant propaganda, exaggerations designed to demonize Catherine. But enough of them appear in independent sources, enough of them align with Catherine's documented methods, that dismissing all of them seems naive. Catherine de' Medici built a sophisticated murder machine and ran it for 30 years. It would be surprising if the darkest operations of that machine were ever fully documented or acknowledged. By the 1580s, Catherine de' Medici had outlived most of her enemies. She'd eliminated the Protestant leadership, compromised the Catholic League, neutralized rival noble families, and consolidated her family's power. Her son Henry III was king, and while he was weak and indecisive, Catherine still wielded enormous influence through him. But age and overreach were catching up with her. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, rather than solving France's religious conflict, had made it worse. The survivors were more radicalized, more determined, more willing to embrace violence. The moderate middle had been eliminated, leaving only extremists on both sides. France descended into a series of wars that even Catherine's manipulation couldn't fully control. The Catholic League, rather than remaining Catherine's tool, became independent under the Duke of Guise. Protestant forces regrouped under Henry of Navarre, the same man who'd married Catherine's daughter and survived the massacre that killed so many of his co-religionists. Catherine tried to play both sides, negotiating secretly with Protestants while publicly supporting Catholics, but her credibility was shot. Everyone knew she'd orchestrated the massacre. No one trusted her promises of peace or safe conduct. Her health began failing in 1588. Lung problems, probably tuberculosis, though some whispered about poetic justice, the poisoner being poisoned. There's no evidence of this, but the rumors persisted. On January 5, 1589, Catherine de' Medici died at age 69 in the Château de Blois. Her death was unremarkable, unlike the hundreds of dramatic deaths she'd orchestrated. She simply grew weaker over several weeks and expired. Her son Henry III was assassinated 7 months later by a Catholic fanatic, ending the Valois dynasty. Ironically, the throne passed to Henry of Navarre, the Protestant prince whose mother Catherine had allegedly poisoned and who'd survived Catherine's massacre. He converted to Catholicism to take the throne, reportedly saying Paris is worth a mass. The machinery of elimination Catherine had built died with her. Her laboratory was dismantled, its contents scattered or destroyed. Her network of priests was exposed and disbanded. Her escadron volant dispersed, some marrying, some entering convents, some disappearing into obscurity. But her methods survived. Catherine de' Medici's techniques of political elimination influenced European court intrigue for centuries. Her sophisticated use of poison, her intelligence networks, her manipulation of religion for political purposes, all became part of the standard playbook for ambitious rulers. The Medici's reputation as poisoners, which started with Catherine, persisted for generations. Medici justice became a euphemism for elegant murder. When someone died mysteriously at an Italian court, people would whisper, "That's very Medici." Her escadron volant model was copied by other courts. Louis XIV had his own version, as did several Italian principalities. The idea of using beautiful women as intelligence assets became standard spycraft. Even her most controversial innovation, compromising confessional secrecy for intelligence gathering, was replicated. The Spanish Inquisition used similar methods. Various monarchs pressured priests to report on their parishioners, though rarely as systematically as Catherine. But Catherine's ultimate legacy is more subtle and more disturbing. She proved that a woman with no official power, no army, no legal authority could nonetheless rule a major European kingdom for 30 years through pure political skill and willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. She proved that systematic, sophisticated murder could be an effective governing strategy if executed with enough care and deniability. She proved that fear, specifically the fear of mysterious death, could control nobles more effectively than laws or armies. And she proved that historical reputation is negotiable. Despite everything she did, despite the thousands of deaths she caused, Catherine is remembered today as a shrewd political operator rather than as a serial killer. Her intelligence and political skill are admired even as her methods are deplored. This is perhaps her greatest achievement. She murdered her way to power and died peacefully in bed, her crimes never officially prosecuted, her reputation largely intact. She taught future rulers that if you kill enough people skillfully enough, you become a historical figure rather than a criminal. That's a dangerous lesson, and it's one that echoes through European history for centuries after her death. Modern historians remain divided on Catherine de' Medici. Some see her as a villain, a murderer who destabilized France and caused religious wars that killed hundreds of thousands. Others see her as a pragmatist doing whatever was necessary to maintain stability in impossible circumstances. The truth, as usual, is probably more complex. Catherine was a woman with no legitimate claim to power operating in a world where women weren't supposed to rule. She had no army, no official authority, no legal mechanism to impose her will. What she had was intelligence, determination, and absolute ruthlessness. She used the tools available to her: poison because she couldn't command armies, seduction because she couldn't force loyalty, manipulation because she couldn't give orders. In a world that denied her legitimate power, she took illegitimate power and wielded it with devastating effectiveness. Was she evil? By modern standards, absolutely. She murdered hundreds, if not thousands of people for political advantage. She corrupted religious institutions, weaponized sexuality, turned every human interaction into potential assassination. She created a climate of fear that made the French court a nightmare of paranoia and suspicion. But was she effective? Undeniably. She kept her sons on the throne for 30 years despite religious wars, noble rebellions, and foreign interference. She maintained French power during one of the most turbulent periods in European history. She protected her family's interests against overwhelming odds. The question is whether effectiveness justifies evil. Can we admire Catherine's political genius while condemning her methods? Can we study her techniques while rejecting her ethics? These aren't just academic questions, because rulers throughout history, and continuing into the present, have studied Catherine's methods and implemented versions of them. The sophisticated use of intelligence networks, the strategic elimination of opposition, the weaponization of gifts and gestures, the corruption of trusted institutions, all are part of the modern authoritarian playbook. Catherine de' Medici proved these methods work. That's her most dangerous legacy. She also proved something else, that the dark arts of power don't require supernatural evil or inhuman cruelty. They just require intelligence, resources, and willingness to cross moral lines that most people won't cross. Catherine was human. Completely, recognizably human. A mother who loved her children. A widow who never remarried after Henry II's death. A patron of arts and architecture. A woman who enjoyed fashion and good food and intelligent conversation. She was also a murderer who eliminated anyone who threatened her power using methods so dark that chroniclers hesitated to describe them fully. Both things were true. Both were Catherine de' Medici. And that, perhaps, is the most disturbing lesson of all. That the woman who poisoned hundreds, who orchestrated massacre, who corrupted confession and weaponized seduction, was not a monster from nightmare but a recognizable human being who made choices. Terrible choices, evil choices, but human choices nonetheless. She proved that ordinary humans, given sufficient motivation and opportunity, can become extraordinarily effective at evil. That's not a comfortable truth, but it's one we need to understand if we're going to recognize and resist when similar people employ similar methods in our own time. Catherine de' Medici eliminated her rivals through methods too dark for the history books, but those methods weren't supernatural or incomprehensible. They were systematic, sophisticated, and disturbingly effective. And that's why her story matters. Not just as historical curiosity, but as warning about what humans can do when power matters more than morality, when winning matters more than ethics, when eliminating enemies matters more than preserving your own humanity. The gloves Catherine sent to Jean d'Albret weren't just poisoned leather. They were a symbol of elegant evil, of death delivered with grace, of murder disguised as generosity. And for 30 years, Catherine wrapped France in those gloves, slowly poisoning everyone who opposed her, until she died peacefully, having never faced justice for her crimes. That's how she eliminated her rivals. Not with crude violence, but with sophisticated systems of death that were too dark for the history books to fully acknowledge. Until now.